Hello everyone and welcome to another video. So for today's video I'm going to be continuing my 60th anniversary series of TV story rankings with a ranking of every 5th Doctor TV story, from Castrovalva to the Caves of Androzani. So without further ado, let's get started. Right, so here is the tier list we're going to be using. So we start off with Castrovalva, which I'm going to put in meh. I mean, it's a decent enough start for Fifth Doctor, and I feel like the fact that this wasn't the first story that Peter Davison recorded as a Doctor, I feel like that kind of helped to for him to kind of settle into the part more, and so that really does kind of help with his performance in this story. But Castrovalva is, I mean, it's written by Christopher H. Bidmead, and he's basically just doing what he's just doing. Christopher H. Bidmead is just doing a Christopher H. Bidmead, essentially, and going again very into that harder science fiction sort of aspect, which, you know, some people are going to be really into, and then some of us, like myself, just are not really that enthusiastic or interested in it. So yeah, it's fine. It's a decent start for the Fifth Doctor, but nothing too special. Bit too convoluted in some ways for its own good, but yeah, not terrible at all by any means. And then we come on to what I would say is a much better story, actually, and that is Fort of Doomsday. Even though Fort of Doomsday is not very well regarded among fans, and indeed even by the cast themselves, but I would say that I enjoy it a lot more than Castrovalva, certainly, because it's more just a traditional Doctor Who story, which, you know, always, it depends on the story, but sometimes can work quite well, and I think Fort of Doomsday works reasonably well. It's a bit sort of dated in a way, like it is very 80s in some of its kind of attitudes, shall we say, but like, you know, that, I mean, what do you expect with a story that was broadcast in 1982? You know, of course it's gonna feel quite 80s. Yeah. Monarch is a pretty good enough. He's a good enough sort of villain, and his interactions with the Fifth Doctor is what kind of really helps to. It really helps to make the story more enjoyable. And yeah, it's an interesting concept for a Doctor Who story. Ultimately, yeah, it's very run of the mill. Ultimately, but yeah, I have a lot of fun with it. Then we come to Kinder, which I'm going to put in. Ooh. Goat or Great? I'll say Great for now. I might change that later on, who knows. But yeah, Kinder I'll put in Great for the time being, because I do really like it, but there are just some others that we're going to get to later on that I enjoy even more, essentially. But yeah, Kinder, a great, terrific story. It sort of deals a bit with sort of like themes of kind of like colonialism, sort of thing, in an interesting way, and yeah, and it then deals with sort of like the stuff with Tegan and the Mara being in her head and everything. That's really interesting. It's a really great story for Tegan. It really does give Janet Fielding quite, you know, some very good material to work with. So yeah, it's a great Tegan story, and yeah, the Mara is just such a great and interesting monster villain. Yeah, I mean, I think enough people sing this story's praises that I don't really need to say much else for it, apart from, yeah, it's very, very good. Although the way that, they kind of write out Nissa for most of the story with her just having to be in a coma for no real good reason is a bit daft and silly, but never mind. Yeah, I think that might have been because of Sarah Sutton's contract. Like, I don't know, I think might have had something to do with some issues with her contract, or maybe she just wasn't available or something, I don't know. Or maybe Christopher Bailey, the writer, just struggled to find something for Nissa to do, perhaps. Yeah. And then we come to the, I think it's Visitation. That I'm going to put in, again, this is another pretty high ranking I'm going to give it, but I don't know where exactly. Goat or great? No, I will say goat, actually. Yeah. Some people might think that's a bit too high, and fair enough. But yeah, I just really love it. I mean, it's a great pseudo-historical story. It's great for Doctor Who to kind of get back to that a bit, because I think it's been a while, really, at this point, since Doctor Who's kind of done a story set in a historical period. Yeah, I think it has been. Might have been. It might not have been since season 15, I think. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think it is Horror Fan Rock or something like that. I could be wrong. If I am, then do feel free to politely shout at me in the comment section below. But yeah, I just, it's a very tried and tested Doctor Who staple to have a story set in a historical period, and this, is just a great example of why that kind of story can work so well. I love the bit at the end where the Doctor inadvertently causes the Great Fire of London. It's just brilliant stuff, really. And I feel like all the companions are given a decent amount to do, because obviously in season 19, this is when you've got 3 companions, Adric, Nissa and Tegan, and sometimes in some stories they're not given as much to do, or some are given more than others. Like Tegan is given quite a lot in Kinder, as I said earlier. Adric is given a fair amount in Fort Doomsday. I mean, he's really annoying and irritating in that story, but he is given a fair amount to do. And then the Visitation, Nissa's got kind of an agency of her own, kind of building that thing in the TARDIS, which destroys that android. Yeah, it's great that you kind of get these little things which all the companions kind of get their moments to shine, really. Because it just helps to further their characters a bit. And then, and I should also say the Pteroleptals as a monster are very, very good. And yeah, I mean, the design maybe does look a bit like too obvious of a man in a rubber mask sort of design, but I mean, it's still pretty good ultimately. Yeah, it's pretty good. Right, so now on to Black Orchid. I'm gonna put this in a bit lower down this time, so it'll go in meh or good. Yeah, I'll put it in good, actually, because it's only 2 episodes, so it doesn't really get much of a chance to actually develop itself that much, but I don't suppose there's really much need for it to develop too much more. I think it would have struggled as a 4-parter. So it being just 2 episodes, I suppose that works quite well. The I mean, there is kind of a threat in the older Cranley brother. I think it's like George is his name, George Cranley, I think. Um, he's a bit of a sort of threat and everything, but it's kind of just, I don't know, I just feel like maybe perhaps there was a bit more that this story could have said about him, about his time overseas, and I think the Amazon rainforest or wherever it was. Um, but yeah, I mean, he's just not really given much chance to develop as a villain, really, and he's not given that much of a detailed motivation, I suppose. But again, it gives Nissa again quite a good chance to shine. Where you've got her and Anne looking, being twins, both being played by Sarah Sutton. That's a nice little sort of twist. But yeah, the whole whodunit murder mystery masquerade sort of plot. I mean, there's not much to it, but it's pretty good, yeah. I think it's sort of, well, I'm not sure I would go as far to say it's a character piece, but you know what I mean, sort of not too far away from that in some ways, yeah. And that works fine, it's a, yeah, pretty decent story. Then we come to Earthshock, which is definitely more than just a pretty decent story. That is definitely going to go in GOAT. No argument, no I'm not doubting as to whether it should be there or not. Earthshock is just as great as everyone loves to bang on about, really. It's a very interesting Cyberman story in that they don't really do anything until I think the last episode or two. But in a way, it kind of works because you've got the androids in them caves and, you know what I mean? You've just kind of got this underlying tone that, some serious stuff is about to go down. And, yeah, the Cybermen are able to kind of... Eric Saywood is able to kind of give them this credible threat feeling to them, even though they don't actually do much in it, which is really good. Yeah, it's a good sign of a great story when, your monster doesn't do much, but you're still able to... They still feel like a real, credible, tangible threat. And yeah, then Adric's death is so powerful, a brilliant, memorable moment in Doctor Who's history, and yeah, I mean, yeah, it is sad that he gets killed off, but it's a really powerful moment, as I say, yeah. David Banks as a cyber leader. David Banks is just brilliant. He's always brilliant throughout all of the 80s Cybermen stories. Yeah, he's just brilliant throughout all of them, but especially in Earthshock. The 80s Cybermen are probably among some of my favourites in a way, because even though they're kind of veering away from that emotionless kind of aspect of the Cybermen, and they're leaning a bit more into using emotive language, such as David Banks's famous "excellent," which I just did very terribly there. But it works so well. So yeah. Oh, and then we get Time Flight. Oh dear, what a disappointment. Yeah, awful. What else can be said, really, apart from it's just absolutely god-awful. A real letdown. I feel like you could have... the whole plot about these Concords going missing and everything, you could have made a really interesting story out of that, but Time Flight just isn't able to do that, unfortunately, which is a real shame. But yeah, I mean, it is a really disappointing end to a pretty good season, actually, season 19. But yeah, it is what it is. I do not get why the Master was disguised as Khalid the Sorcerer. I do not get why he did that at all, because it's so obviously him. It's so obviously Anthony Ainley in a mask. It's just not good at all. But yeah. Anyway, that is it for season 19. Right, so we're now on to season 20. Probably, in my opinion anyway, the weakest of the Peter Davison series. So we're not off to a great start with Arc of Infinity, which, is going to have to basically join Time Flight Awful, because, again, you could have made something really interesting about, returning to Gallifrey for the first time in, again, quite a while, I think. You could have also made something out of Omega's return, but yeah, there's just not much to really. There's nothing memorable really, apart from about Arc of Infinity, apart from the fact that obviously this features a certain future Sixth Doctor, Colin Baker, shooting his immediate predecessor to get his job. That's quite funny, but he does quite a good job of playing Maxil the guard. And then the scenes in Amsterdam, I mean, they really do take advantage of that location filming in Amsterdam, but it works fairly. I mean, it looks very good anyway. If nothing else, very nice looking location for them to use. So why not get your money's worth out of it? But yeah, there's just not really much to say apart from that. Yeah, it could have easily been so much better. It definitely had some potential, but it just did not live up to it ultimately. And then we got Snake Dance. Meh or good? Good or meh? Yeah, I'll put it in meh because, I mean, well, I wouldn't say I hate it. It's a definite improvement over Arc of Infinity and Time Flight. But it's just nowhere near as good as Kinder. Ultimately, it's just not a. It's not a terrible sequel to it, but it's just nowhere near as memorable, as impactful, or as interesting a story. But it's nice to have Damara come back. Although, like, I know the whole kind of gimmick of season 20 is like bringing old monsters, old villains back. But the fact that they brought back Damara, who had only appeared in like the previous season, and counted that as a returning monster, I mean, yeah, it counts, don't get me wrong, but you know what I mean? It's kind of just a bit like, well, you know. But yeah, Snake Dance is a completely fine story. Don't necessarily have any major issues with it. Just nowhere near as good as Kinder. But it does have some interesting sort of spiritual sort of stuff going on. Sort of ethereal, I suppose you could say. When the Fifth Doctor is sort of in, I think, telepathic communication with that guy. I can't remember his name, but yeah, something like that. That's fairly interesting. Makes for a nice little visual, but yeah, not much else to say for Snake Dance apart from that. Then we come on to Mordrin Undead, which is going to go in good. A very great reappearance for the Brigadier, although quite why he's ended up teaching maths at a private school is a bit out of character, because obviously this was originally intended for Ian Chesterton, which would have been far more in character for Ian. But yeah, Brigadier, it's great to have him back. Great to see him interacting with the Fifth Doctor. Yeah, some nice kind of time travel shenanigans with the two Brigadiers, one from 1977, one from 1983. Yeah, it's just very interesting. Great introduction for Turlo, as this companion who is introduced as the one that's trying to kill the Doctor, because he's been told to by the Black Guardian. Yeah, it's a pretty good story. Although the Black Guardian, again, really, to be honest, I mean, we'll get this. I may as well say this now, really. The Black Guardian trilogy, it's a very loose sort of trilogy, really, because Enlightenment is really the actual, the real story that has the Black Guardian as well, a main villain, anyway. And yeah, it's kind of that, and then that whole thing kind of gets resolved in the final few minutes of Enlightenment, so it then kind of begs the question of why on earth did we have the Black Guardian around for the previous two stories when he doesn't get to do much, and what little he was up to gets resolved quite easily. But anyway, Terminus, I'm going to put that in meh as well. Nothing spectacular, but nothing terrible. A decent enough exit for Nyssa, but I feel like she kind of deserved a better farewell, really. But the farewell scene itself is pretty good. Yeah, not much else to say for Terminus. It's a fine enough story. Got some interesting ideas, but just, yeah, not the greatest. Then we've got Enlightenment. I'll put this in good as well. Yeah. As I said already about the whole Black Guardian situation, why bother to make a trilogy of stories about him when you're not really going to actually do much with him until the final of those three stories. And even then, that, as I said earlier, it's basically just the last 5 minutes of it. So, what was the point, really? But it's a pretty good, interesting story. The Eternals are very interesting, sort of, not necessarily villains, but just kind of aliens. Yeah, it's a really interesting sort of take on a Doctor Who alien species. Tegan gets some interesting things to do. Obviously, you've got the whole wrap up of Turlo being asked by the Black Guardian to kill the Doctor. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily rate the Black Guardian trilogy overall as that great. But I would say that, like, really, Enlightenment and Mordrin Undead are the best kind of parts of that trilogy, and Terminus is like the weakest by far. Especially Enlightenment is pretty good, yeah, because it's got some really interesting, intriguing stuff going on with the Eternals and their race through the solar system, I think it is. That's just really interesting. Then we come to the King's Demons. Awful. Yeah. I actually used to kind of, I think it was because it was like a pseudo-historical, so I used to not rank it that highly, but I thought of it, as fairly okay. But yeah, my most recent rewatch of it for 60th, I just... it's just a nothing story, quite frankly. And again, why is the Master in a disguise that is so clearly Anthony Ainley? Why? As for the introduction of Chameleon, it's a decent enough introduction for him, and that's really what the King's Demons is basically here for, to introduce Chameleon. It's fine, but poor old Chameleon doesn't get used much So, because of the technical limitations of the robot itself, because obviously it was a real life robot chameleon. Yeah, it's just it's a shame. Chameleon could have been quite an interesting companion, but it's just never really utilized that much in the TV show. Maybe like if he was to be introduced in the show now, like I think technology has progressed to the point where they could kind of be able to do more with him nowadays. But yeah, in 1983, they just couldn't really do that much with him. Then the Five Doctors, Goat, gives season 20 a really, really good ending. Yeah, it's funny really because the version of the Five Doctors that I'm the most familiar with, is actually the special edition version, which was released on VHS in, I think it was 1995, and then I think it was the first classic series DVD to be released in like 1999, and I've actually got that DVD. And that was one of the first classic stories I ever watched. In fact, it might have been the first. And so yeah, I always grew up with that kind of Mr. Whippy looking. I can't remember what the name of it is, but you know, like a time vortex. No, not vortex. You know what I mean? The thing the time scoop. That's it. The time scoop that scoops the different doctors out of their time zones and everything. I always grew up with the Mr. Whippy looking one, and then when I saw the original version, which was just like a black triangle, I was really disappointed because yeah, it just doesn't look very good. But I mean, it's not gonna look very good, is it? It was 1983. But yeah, the story itself, great. A great celebration of 20 years of Doctor Who, as it was then. A shame that Tom Baker didn't come back for it, but then again, if he had, I believe the plan was that he basically would have been the main Doctor doing stuff, which would have been very strange, because obviously he wasn't the current Doctor. Like, it makes sense for the fifth Doctor to be doing it, because he's the then current Doctor. But if the fourth Doctor had been doing most of what the fifth ended up doing, then I don't know how that would have felt. It would have felt like Tom Baker was upstaging not just Peter Davison but all the other Doctors as well. So yeah, I suppose it's a bit complicated really. Like, it would have been nice for Tom to have come back so we could have seen him alongside all the other Doctors, and interacting and bickering and stuff with them. But then, you know, if he's just gonna outshine them all, then yeah. But this probably sounds way more negative than I mean it to. But like, the Five Doctors, easily one of my favourite Fifth Doctor stories. Yeah, just brilliant. Ultimately, yeah. I think I've lost my train of thought now, so I'll just kind of leave it here now for season 20. Now on to season 21. Right, so we're now on to season 21, the Fifth Doctor's final season, and maybe, I would say maybe the best. I don't know, it's kind of difficult to kind of say between season 21 and season 19. But yeah, so the story we're going to start off with, Warriors of the Deep, that can go straight in awful, because it is absolutely terrible, quite frankly. Some of the stuff it was trying to say about a sort of Cold War allergy, it's interesting, but it just gets lost and muddied in this frankly awful looking story. I know they had issues with getting the studio space and time for it because of, I think there was a UK general election in 1983. Yeah, there was when, and that came as quite a surprise. You see, for the BBC and stuff. So yeah, it meant that they then struggled to get the time they needed to film this story afterwards. And then it's just the kind of, this is where really, to be honest, classic Doctor Who does look awful. It really does not look good. The production values on this story they're just not good. I mean, the sets are kind of alright, but the lighting doesn't really do them justice, doesn't really do them any favours. It's a very weird sort of lighting. And just some of the script is just not very good. It's like, why on earth is it in the first... I said this recently on the recent Kavam podcast I did with Elliot, Ryan and Charlie, but why on earth is it that in the first cliffhanger for the first episode, so at the end of episode 1, why is it that the Fifth Doctor falls into like this swimming pool, and then after like 5 seconds, Turlough's just like, oh, face it, Tegan, he's drowned. And it's just such a... I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say Mark Strickson, like, his acting for that scene is, like, bad, but it's just... The logic of that cliffhanger just doesn't make sense. I think that's what I'm trying to get at, because it's so easily resolved in the beginning of episode 2, because he just swims away. I mean, if the Fifth Doctor wasn't able to swim, then there might have been some actual jeopardy there that might actually have made for an interesting cliffhanger. But as it is, he can swim, so he just swims away. So what was the point in that cliffhanger? And then yeah, the Silurians and Sea Devils, it's nice to have them back. The design of the Silurians it's not as great as the original 1970s one, but it's still fairly okay. And the Sea Devils, I mean, they've got this weird sort of samurai armour on, which looks a bit strange, but then, you know, given that the previous time they appeared, they were wearing string vests, I mean, you know, I suppose it looks a lot less silly. But then the Merca comes along, and I think you've got Ingrid Pitt, I think her name is, her bizarre kind of karate chopping of it and martial arts. I don't get what was going on there at all. I wouldn't be surprised if she just ad-libs that. Yeah, we'll move on from Always the Deep, because yeah, it's just awful. Although I should say, the ending of the Fifth Doctor saying there should have been another way, and the look that Peter Davison kind of gives off to the camera, yeah, it is quite powerful. That final like 10 seconds is quite powerful. It's a lot more powerful, a lot more effective than the rest of, you know, the last 4 episodes, four full episodes. Yeah, says it all. Anyway, The Awakening, far better, going straight in great. Yeah, I mean, some people might be surprised I'm putting it this high, because, again, it's another 2-parter. Peter Davison era did like to do this, kind of having 2-parters in there occasionally, which is kind of a bit strange, but also kind of works fairly well for most part. Apart from The King's Demons, it works quite well with The Awakening and Black Orchid. The Awakening is a very good, tight little story set in a quaint English village. You know, the kind of, again, the fairly, what feels anyway like a very traditional sort of Doctor Who classic series setting. And it works very well, the whole reenactment stuff going on with the English Civil War stuff, that's very interesting. and the Malice is a very effective monster. Doesn't really do anything, just is there like peering out of a wall. But you know, it looks good. It looks good. It looks cool, if nothing else. Um, and yeah, you've got two great could have been companions in this. With Will and the older lady. I can't remember her name, but yeah, they make for quite an interesting, what if TARDIS team. With them two and the Fifth Doctor. Yeah, very very good, and maybe I don't know. I don't really see many fans going on about this season, going on about this story. I should say, sorry, too much. So maybe you could say it's a bit underrated, underappreciated. Um, yeah, I really like The Awakening. It's a nice little gem of a story. Yeah. Then we come to Frontios, which I'm going to put in good. Not as good as The Awakening, but still pretty good. I would say probably one of Christopher H. Bidmead's better scripts, in my personal opinion. As I said earlier, I know some people will like his approach to Doctor Who, but it's just not one that I could gel with personally. His take on Doctor Who and my take on Doctor Who are just too different, I think, ultimately. But Frontios is pretty good, a more traditional Doctor Who story for Christopher H. Bidmead to write. But it's, yeah, pretty interesting. The Tractators are actually quite a intriguing enough monster. Yeah, it's a pretty good story. I mean, its most memorable moment really is when the TARDIS seemingly gets blown up and there's nothing left but the hat stand. And then yeah, obviously it's later reveals that it's actually still there. Yeah, but it's good. It's pretty good story. It's quite dark, quite, yeah. I suppose you could almost say not depressing, but you know what I mean, kind of that kind of feeling to it. Speaking of dark and definitely depressing, is Resurrection of the Daleks. Goat, but my god, the death toll in this. I mean, it's a real Eric Saywood's slasher of a story. It really is. I think that's the term. Yeah. Yeah. It's awful how pretty much everybody, apart from the main cast, I think, yeah, the three regulars, everyone else pretty much gets killed off. And it's just so morbid and dark and just awful. But it makes for such a powerful and gripping story. The Daleks come back with a big bang. Lytton is a great character. And obviously we'll come back to him later on in the sixth Doctor ranking with Attack of the Cybermen. Davros, Terry Malloy does a great job of playing Davros. Especially love his back and forth with Peter Davison as the Doctor. Tegan's farewell scene, that's so emotional but so brilliantly well written and well acted. Yeah, it's just a great story from start to finish, and yeah, I think easily one, as you can tell from the fact I put it in GOAT, easily one of my favourite Fifth Doctor stories, and probably not too far away. I mean, I would say a bit further down, but it's probably perhaps in my top 50 Doctor Who stories of all time. And then we come on to Planet of Fire. Put this in there. Bit of a step down from Resurrection of the Daleks, but it's okay. It's a decent enough send-off for Chameleon and for Turlo. It's quite nice to finally find out Turlo's origins and his backstory and everything. That's really interesting. Nice introduction for Perry. Yeah, it's fine. Not too much to write home about, but yeah, it's pretty decent. Yeah. And then the Caves of Androzani. Another goat, and I don't think this will come as any great shock to anyone because the Caves of Androzani is often seen as one of the greatest Doctor Who stories of all time, and I completely concur with that sentiment, essentially. So yeah, it would definitely not just be my top 50 like Resurrection, but probably top 20. Yeah, probably top 20 favourite Doctor Who stories of all time. A great last hurrah for the Fifth Doctor, a great send off for him, and Peter Davison has given some really kind of meaty stuff to get into with this story, and his acting chops, I mean, it's just great throughout. I love how sarcastic the Fifth Doctor is. I mean, the Fifth Doctor often was quite sarcastic, but especially in Androzani. Nicola Bryant as Perry is very good. Shara's Jack is such a great, again, interesting villain. And it's just kind of like, it's this story where, again, you just feel like the odds are just stacked against the Doctor, and nothing is going to go his way. And that is the reason why I love the Fifth Doctor so much, is like he's often in these situations where he's completely out of control. He's not in control of the situation at all. Like I would say the first four Doctors often were to varying degrees, but the Fifth Doctor not even slightly. Him and Perry are just in this awful, awful world with all these awful, awful people in Androzani, and yeah, great bit of drama. What else can I say? I mean, yeah, Robert Holmes really came back with a bang, ultimately, and did a superb job of writing the Fifth Doctor out. And yeah, so obviously, like, that is not technically the end of season 21, so we will continue with season 21 in the next Doctor ranking, that is for the 6th Doctor. So that'll be at the end of next month. So there we go. But anyway, so there's my ranking of every 5th Doctor TV story. But what's yours, and did you agree with mine or not? Please let me know in the comments section below. Anyway, so thanks for watching, hope you liked it. Please don't forget to press that subscribe button below, as well as press the bell icon at the side of it, so that you'll stay notified of when all my new videos come out. This channel currently has 995 subscribers as of time of writing and recording this video. But if we can get to 1000 by the end of this year, then I'll do my very own fan-made audio story. Also please rate, and I shall see you all in another video. So, until next time, bye bye!